Let's start with this. Now, look. Oh, God, this guy. All right, so apparently there's this other podcast called Pod Save America. This, of course, is a play on God Save America.
Which is not a thing, by the way.
Well, it's not a thing. Pod Save America is not a thing, but it is a thing. It exists. And here is Pod Save America. They copied us on the type of,
everything.
The microphone. The boom.
The hat wearing.
They had big headphones, though, because they're still getting used to the idea of being on radio. I got over that a long time ago. And so here is John Lovett. Now, this is the guy who's now a comedy writer, right? Is that right? Is John Lovett isn't one of them a comedy writer?
I don't know if he's officially a comedy writer, but he fancies himself comedic.
He
wrote a pilot.
Okay.
He was on The Critic in SNL, right?
Everybody gets a pilot.
But
all of their names are taken.
Here is and this is why back in my Bumble days, I wrote on my profile, "Let me tell you why you can do better than Pod Save America."
Oh, wow. Can you imagine the appeal of that? It's like, I will lecture you over dinner about why your podcast.
Well, I just
That'll
realized
get your sweats left very quickly.
I just realized I'm missing a
What's
huge
up, honey, baby?
branding opportunity.
Your podcasts are bad.
Nevertheless, here is John Lovett making an argument that I think is wrong.
There are legitimate policy arguments in favor of a Medicare access approach as opposed to a Medicare for all approach that is not ideological in the sense that it doesn't make you less liberal and it doesn't make you less progressive to view it as a positive outcome, because again, we are all going to end up paying for healthcare. The ultimate goal here is not a process one. It is not, a private healthcare plan versus a Medicare plan. If you have good insurance that you can afford, that protects you when you need it most, that gives you the option to get the preventative care that you need without bankrupt you and your family, that makes you feel safe and protected, that is the goal. As a country, our goal is to pay for everyone's healthcare in a way that doesn't eat up a greater and greater share of our gross domestic product. That is the ultimate goal. The debate about policy, the debate about process is a really, really important one, but it should not be always reduced to this ideological question as to whether or not you're going along with Bernie or if you're part of the neoliberals. It is more complicated and a more nuanced than that.
Okay, here's what I agree with. It is more nuanced than he's making it. He's actually reducing it far too, in generalizing it far too much. I keep it back up there because I want to replay the first part of it. Look, I agree with the sentiment that it is silly to put labels on this, and that these questions, I don't know what it means that these questions, if he's saying they aren't ideological differences or if they shouldn't be. But the reality is there's a word here he uses that does a tremendous amount of work, more work than it can do in reality. And that word is if. All right, let's play it down.
There are legitimate policy arguments in favor of a Medicare access approach as opposed to a Medicare for all approach that is not ideological in the sense that it doesn't make you less liberal and it doesn't make you less progressive to view it as a positive outcome, because again, we are all going to end up paying for healthcare. The ultimate goal here is not a process one. It is not, a private healthcare plan versus a Medicare plan. If you have good insurance that you can afford, that protects you when you need it most, that gives you the option to get the preventative care that you need without bankrupt you and your family, that makes you feel safe and protected, that is the goal. As a country, our goal is to pay for everyone's healthcare in a way that doesn't eat up a greater and greater share of our gross domestic product. That is the ultimate goal.
Right. First off, it is clear that we cannot achieve that goal that he's talking about, not just the GDP, but having health care that will not bankrupt you and your family, it is clear that we cannot do that with reliance on the private health insurance industry. That model does not work. I think there's a legitimate, actual argument that you could have supplemental private health insurance. But if every person in the country does not have the ability to bypass the private health insurance industry, then we're not going to get there. It is just the case that the private health insurance industry does not have a functioning business model that does not involve making it very difficult to insure people properly. That's just the fact. And so you can say if, but unless that word if is magic and can actually change physics, you're not going to get there. Aside from that, we shouldn't just have health insurance that does not threaten to bankrupt us. We are past this now. The American public compromised for decades. That we're willing to have the aspiration for insurance that won't bankrupt us. We're okay with insurance that won't bankrupt us or that will actually cover us, right? That's what the ACA was. That was supposedly the deal we were making, but it didn't work on the bankrupt side. It cut down on bankruptcies, no doubt, but it also puts such economic pressure, and it ties us into employers. It doesn't free us up. We want freedom from this, and the government in a Medicare for all. Like I say, the existence of private insurance as a supplement, that doesn't implicate this. But Medicare for all, where the government insures all of us, insures and assures us, you will get health insurance. You will be able to pay for this. The vast majority of doctors will have to take it because they will have no business otherwise. There will be no point in them being doctors. They won't see any patients otherwise. And incidentally, you won't have to go through some type of maze to get refunded or to find out if your doctor covers you. All this stuff.
Deal with
We're
less
done.
bureaucracy.
The American people is done. We made that compromise and it didn't work. It wasn't enough that we just don't get bankrupt. We want it not to be our second or third job to get health insurance and to worry if we're covered, or to deal with it's the opt-in, the open enrollment this year, this month, or do I qualify, or what if I got to stay at this job, or I'm going to lose my health insurance. We're done with that. The American public is done with that. And to that extent, it is an ideological battle. I mean, I think it gets a little bit too reduced in some ways. I think people overuse the word neoliberal, but nevertheless, it is a real difference. That is not process. It's no more a process than like the difference between walking somewhere and taking a plane. Yes, you'll get there. You'll get there. You want to go to LA?
That's a process question.
You want to get to LA? Don't argue with me about whether you're going to take a plane or whether you're going to walk. You'll get to LA. That's what dismissing those plans as process is equivalent to. It really makes a material difference whether you fly to LA from New York or walk to LA from New York. When you fly, you get there quicker. When you walk, you get there much later, and it's going to be exhausting. You'll probably have blisters. Maybe unless you brought food along the way, you might be hungry or cold or exposed to the weather. Where are you going to sleep during that time?
You'll have a greater appreciation of the lay of the land, though.
This is
Get
not
to know
just,
this country.
This is not
character.
just a process question. And beyond that, even if you want to go beyond that, okay, there is an argument that from an ideological perspective, there are implications to simply saying that the government has a responsibility to provide health insurance. It's not that dramatic of a thing. We do it for a quarter of third of the population right now, to the American public. And to have a relationship between its citizens and the government where everyone can enjoy the benefits that Medicare recipients do is important in terms of people's understanding of their relationship to their government, which will pay other dividends. But even keeping it as narrowly situated as Levitt wants to, he's wrong.
Well, here's the thing. Like, he says that we're the ones being ideological, but all the evidence points to the fact that the best way to guarantee healthcare for everyone is a single payer system. So if you look at the evidence and you still want a market-based solution, I think you're being the ideological one. But also, like, there is an essential difference in ideology between the people who believe that healthcare is a right that should be socially provided for and free at point of service, and those who don't think that it is. And that's like not something that can really be reconciled. But that's why the pragmatic arguments, again, are so important, because like just one counterpoint to what he's saying that he doesn't seem to understand is that if rich people have private insurance and their taxes are going to pay for public insurance for poor people, rich people are going to be incentivized to want to shrink that system as much as they possibly can so that they don't have to pay for it. Whereas if everybody is on the same health system, then the people with the power have a lot of buy-in and it's a lot less vulnerable to attack.
I think that's true. Although in the context of Social Security, right, everybody pays in. Rich people don't need that social insurance when they're richer. The $2,000 a month or $2,600 a month that they get is meaningless to them. But they still can't touch Social Security. I think if everyone is involved in it, the rich that would have perhaps a supplemental private insurance, if they want a concierge, they want their doctor to show up at their house or whatever, and give them check their blood pressure at their home. Fine, all well and good. But here's the thing that is disingenuous about this: there is no argument that the mixed version he's talking about is more practical. You never hear anyone make that argument. The practicality, or I should say, is more functional. The practicality is there are forces that we cannot fight. And if we want to remove the ideology from this debate, the way to do it is to say Medicare for all. You either criticize Medicare for all, that is on its merits, or you say we simply as a country are too beholden to the financial interest of the private health insurance industry to get enough people to politically do this. Like all of that talk, you hear about it, but it's whispered, right? Well, it's time to make it explicit. If you want to advocate for this because you don't think that we as a society, even though the vast majority of people might want it, have the political will to fight the money in the private health insurance industry, then you are doing a disservice to the country to not admit that's the problem. Right. Because once that's admitted, then things are going to start getting ideological. Like, it's not ideological necessarily to say, I want a Medicare buy-in versus a Medicare for all. Particularly, it's not until you start explicitly saying, I'm okay with a system where people, the vast majority of people want one thing, but we have too many powerful moneyed interests. And be specific about it. There's too many powerful who are going to prevent us from getting that, and spell it out. And then we can move on to the next question is like, what are we going to do about that problem? You know, what are we going to do in terms of antitrust? Or what are we going to do about expropriating the value maybe it is for some of the drugs that they get,
And
the runaway
unfortunately,
profits.
it shows where they're stuck.
So they can't spend, so that they're allowed to spend on lobbying, but they're not going to because we're going to take away the profit margin on that drug in such a way that they're going to want to just pay themselves instead of just getting lobbying.
Instead of trying to corrupt the process. And yeah, but that's also where they're just stuck because, you know, when Obama did healthcare, I mean, you could legitimately say there just wasn't the political context and will to take on all of the fights you need to have. And that would be a legitimate historical argument. It was the wrong policy because even my understanding from reading people like Hacker, who I think is where like the overall design for that plan came
Absolutely.
from, that essentially it isn't just like the public plan is ideologically important, but the public plan is the structure that keeps the prices down essentially. So it's very difficult to implement that successfully, just even on a technocratic level without that part of the package. But they might have had a case back then that like, look, people aren't invested in the specifics. The debate back then was, you know, it was still a mainstream position for people to say like, who weren't just Republicans, to say like, well, you know, having 40 million people without coverage is just part of how we do things. It's totally not the case today. And if you want to say that we're still totally backed in a corner, like what you're saying, then it's like you have to make a completely different argument. And that's going to be
You got to be explicit with it.
You got to be super explicit. And I think and same goes for all of the candidates who are going to be prevaricating on those issues, whether they're clearly like Biden or McAuliffe or Bloomberg, but also like a Harris or a Booker who've been flip-flopping.
Or Elizabeth Warren. I would have respect for a candidate who says, I want Medicare for all, but I'm putting people on notice right now that the health insurance industry is extremely powerful and they're going to fight for it. And we may not end up with a Medicare for all, but we're going to have to fight for it. And it's going to require the American public to stand up and fight for it and also adopt some other mechanisms in which to curb their power in this fight.
100%. And I mean, also though, I just want to say like, I agree with you about like sort of like ancillary providers not being the biggest thing in the world. Like if there's some type of private home care or something, I mean, I wouldn't prefer it, but I don't think that that's central to this question of like essentially eliminating insurance companies and HMOs and making it free at point of delivery. But I think on the other hand, I'm very interested in making as much of the health system writ large in public hands as possible. So while I would say like, okay, we could negotiate on that, but I want to start seeing like following Elizabeth Warren, what about making the pharmaceutical industry, expropriating that and making it public and really starting to put, you know, more on the table? Because theoretically, that's another way of addressing the advantages they have is actually just blistering them at as many angles as possible.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Just like, hey, we're going for everything. Not only single payer, we're also going to make the pharma industry public. It's all built on public research. You profit off of privatized commons anyways. We're going to go after hospital chains. So when you think about the fight back, it's not going to just be single payer. It's the whole thing.
Yeah, it's going to become increasingly clear during this fight who is a good faith left liberal and who thinks it's totally fine to let a private profit take precedence over the wants and needs of the majority.
I'm